All right, everyone, welcome. My name is Dana Price, and I will be your host today for Coach's Corner. So the topic today is strength training, something for everyone. So this is definitely a hot topic at all times. It doesn't go away. You'll hear coaches always talk about strength training, strength training, strength training. And sometimes you're curious, is it for you? And that's what we're going to talk about today. A lot of times we get the misconception that strength training is only for meatheads or for people looking to bulk or bodybuilders, things like that. So we're going to break that myth today. Who we're talking to is Xavion. So Xavion, give a wave today so everyone knows who we're talking to. He is one of our experts in the field. So other coaches will chime in throughout, but we'll mostly stick with Xavion today. So first and foremost, we're going to start off with some questions for you, Xavion. So we put Xavion on the hot seat where we ask him 10 questions beforehand, and the first answer that comes to mind is what he's going to answer with. And surprise today, I do not have a list of questions. So this is just me asking. I don't have a list. We're going to see how this goes, right? I was on vacation last week, so excuse my non-preparedness here. But Xavier, ready to go?
Let's do it.
All right, here we go. Top 10 questions. Favorite vacation spot?
Ooh, lake house.
Favorite
Not a particular
coffee.
lake.
Okay, favorite coffee?
Ooh, right now we really like Sun or Ghost here in Louisville, local to Louisville.
Football or basketball?
Basketball.
Favorite musical artist?
J. Cole.
Barbell or dumbbells?
Barbell.
Cables or Kaiser?
Kaiser.
Vanilla ice cream or chocolate?
Vanilla.
Pop-Tarts or toaster strudels?
Pop-Tarts.
Ooh, really? Recovery or mobility?
Yeah. Mobility.
Favorite color?
Green.
Middle name?
Ray.
Who's the favorite person in your family?
Mom.
All right, that's all I got. It was coming off the top of my head. That's all I got today. Out, but I had to throw that last one in there. All right, guys, we're gonna hop right into it. So something I want to start with is a lot of times, again, we talk about the misconception around strength training. So Xavion, how would you describe strength training and what does it really entail?
For sure. The way I would describe it, it's a pretty big umbrella. It's, trying not to use too many sciencey words, but it's anything you have to do in producing force within relatively few efforts, right? So, technically running is multiple efforts over a long period of time. It's usually with lifts and weights and resistance training, rather. It's much shorter durations, much shorter efforts, but that could be with typical free weights, barbells, dumbbells, but it can also be with machines or cables or resistance bands, which really are just glorified rubber bands. So your possibilities are endless. Body weight is also resistance training. That's a question I have come up with a lot of the folks that I speak with.
So we usually see a certain demographic in the weight room, right? And usually it's like particular age range. Usually, let's just call it how it is. You'll see more males in the weight room versus females, which ladies on the call, let's change this. But I want to talk about, who do you feel strength training is really most appropriate for?
For sure. The annoying catch-all answer is everyone, but I was thinking about this to myself, and kind of asked myself this question the other day. I would think about it if you broke people up into categories, right? Like there is the general health, especially in a preventative nature. I'd also kind of tagline, quality of life reasoning, and that is kind of most people, I think. And that's the person that fall into that category might be the type of individual that only resistance trains for, a quick 30 minutes, 45-minute bout and just does their bare minimum and just is looking to maintain and or slightly improve their health, right? They don't necessarily have sport goals or anything of that nature. Something that, if it is not us right now, but will eventually be us, is the aging population. Let's call that what it is. As we age, it becomes increasingly more important. And I try to have this conversation with really anyone that I have the opportunity with. I mean, as early as 30, I hear people start saying, oh, my back, oh, I'm not young anymore. My hips and things don't act like they used to. And, all this and that about how just daily life is kind of impacting them more. Putting yourselves through the challenges that can come with strength training can really be, preventative in that nature. Let's take it even further, as we get into what would actually be considered more of an elderly status. Your quality of life can be pretty well held on to, if not really, really great, with consistent and strategic strength training throughout your life. And I'd even add on to that it is never too late. If you're kind of already there, you definitely can see some improvement. The last group that I would have is really anybody that's into anything recreational. If you have a hobby, like you're like, no, I like to play basketball on the weekends. That's my exercise. As a former basketball player, can't tell me that you've never had an ache, pain, or an injury coming out of that. Regularly strength training can actually, of course, improve your basketball playing, but also just leveling that back a little bit, be preventative in nature of, sprained ankles and your stability of your joints as you're running and cutting on the court and just trying to have fun doing the things that you actually really love to do.
Yeah, and it's funny you should say that. Like, I was visiting my parents this weekend. They're in their mid 60s. It's actually my mother's birthday. So Mom, you're not listening, but happy birthday. She's 64 today. And something that she said to me this weekend, like, I've loved training since I've been like 16 years old. And as I've gotten older, she's like, are you sure you still need to work out 5 days a week? Like, what if you cut it back to 3? And she doesn't realize, like, I love this. So like, I like to train. It's my outlet. But also she's like, should you still be pushing your body as hard as you do? And it's this misconception of like, the older we get, really the less we should do. Oh, you could hurt yourself. And like, it's actually the exact opposite. It's like, when you stop doing it is when you start to have injuries or start to get hurt. It's like, it's aging. It's one of those things, you use it or you lose it. My grandfather is 94 years old and just absolutely refuses to stop walking. And he has to use a walker. And my mom has been like, why don't you use your wheelchair or your motorized thing? He's like, absolutely not. And the reason he can get around at 94 is because he hasn't stopped doing that. And because he still has the muscle, he still has the bone density that he developed throughout the ages. And you don't have to be 94. It's the same thing for our 40s, for our 50s. Like, you still need to train like that. Like, you don't just need to fall off. Your life, your physical activity isn't ending at 40, right? Like, actually, the more we age, the more we need to keep our bone density high, our muscle tone high, for preventative things like osteoporosis or joint pain, things like that. So it leads me into my next question. Every coach on here, like, if you hop on a one-on-one call with them, and your goal is to lose weight or your goal is to stay healthy, their number one recommendation, I guarantee you, is going to be strength training, lifting weights. And you're going to be like, well, I thought I should just jump on the treadmill for 30 minutes. Like, why is it important? Why is it so, like, the pinnacle of what every coach goes to? Why is strength training so important for literally everyone?
For sure. There's a couple different angles I could approach that from, especially with that coach perspective in mind. First and foremost, with your health, I think it is just that. Like, when people say, in my experience, in the conversations that I've had, when people say they want to start exercising, that's kind of their first inkling is to go walk outside, run on the treadmill, etc. And that's probably what people think to go with first. Maybe there's a level of comfort with that. I mean, there is something very natural about running and approaching exercise from that perspective. The other side of it is the skill acquisition of it as well. That I think, that's the one area where we feel like we might be able to do the most good, in the sense of that we can give you some running cues and tips, and then we can prescribe what you need to do on the treadmill. But with your weightlifting, there's these micro changes that we can make in the moment with your technique and really help you move forward with that. Thinking about the health though, I mean, you just listed off a bunch of items. Is bone health, maintaining muscle mass as we age is going to be essential. Dana, you and I have had a really great conversation on balance, which I'd even admit, like, maybe wasn't at the forefront of my mind for a lot of my career, but I've immediately begun shifting my train of thought into how I can improve balance and things of that nature within the clients and the individuals that I'm working with.
Yeah, it goes all the way down to like simple life stuff, right? That's going to make your life easier. And it's like a couple things. So if I'm doing like a group training class, I'll talk to I work with some middle-aged women in training, and I talk to them about like 5 minutes a day, or like at least in the morning, do like 10 single leg RDLs, even if you're like holding on to something, or stand up and lift one foot off the ground. It's like, can you stand up and put your socks on? Like, how many individuals honestly sit down to put their socks on? And that's okay. I'm not saying that's wrong, right? That's like just easier. But is it not doable? Can you stand up and put your sock on? I mean, you can like hold on to something or something like that, but like, try that, see where your balance is. And like, because that's the first thing to go as you age. And then once you're significantly older, balance is going to become a big issue. Let's talk about broken hips. You hear individuals that, are in their upper 70s, 80s, they have a fall, they break their hip, and it's literally really never the same after that. Their health declines drastically. Or can you sit in your computer chair and take one foot off the ground and stand up using one leg? That's strength right there. And that's the part that I think people start to miss. They think about, barbell movements like big deadlifts or bench press when they think of strength training. Like, can you sit in a chair and put one foot on the ground and one foot off, and can you stand up? Like, that's glute strength, that's balance, but most of that's lower body strength. So, that's a lot of times where I start my clients, is like having them sit on a bench and simply stand up on one foot. And that's strength training, right? And that's what we mean by is for everyone. So the big thing that you said is cardio may seem easier, or it's a low barrier to entry, right? It doesn't take a lot of skill. So what would you say to individuals that want to start weight training, but it's intimidating to walk into a weight room and see guys and girls just slanging weight around? Like, I mean, what would you suggest to start? Like, how do you feel like you're not a kindergartner walking into class for the first day and you're scared to death? Like, what would you suggest there?
For sure. There's a couple angles I'd probably approach that, actually. Start with kind of the low hanging fruit in my mind is, if you're concerned with your technique, your weights, like actually lifting the weights and things of that nature, start light, do your research on your technique, get a coach, something of that nature, to boost your confidence there. Start light, and you can always build up from there, right? So you think about like pressing dumbbells, that's intimidating, having the weight kind of over your body like that. You can start on the low end of the scale and then move your way up as you go. You do eventually need to take that step. On the social end of things, kind of entering that space and, maybe feeling intimidated by the company that you're like, that is there with you, or the things that are going on in that space. I would have some similar suggestions. You can find a coach or something like that. I've had people work with me for the course of like a month just to build their confidence and learn their way around that weight room and really start to feel like it's their space, because it really is. It is for everyone. Workout partners are great, especially if they have some experience in that realm. That way you can feel a little bit confident in some of the things that they're doing. The other thing too, I've had individuals like maybe on like specific occasions throughout the week, it might not be the best for their schedule. You can even show up at times where the traffic might be a little bit lighter and start to familiarize yourself with that space, and then become a little bit more regularly acquainted during the higher traffic times, if that works a little bit better for your schedule. But then by that point, you're going to realize that people are really there tending to be focused on what they're doing for the most part. And that's kind of the beauty of it. You might have some individuals that want to be social every once in a while, but for the most part, people tend to be really locked in. And as soon as you can kind of really feel like that is your space to be in, I think you could take it a really long way.
No, I love that. You touched on a few like really passion topics that I have for people is like, no one deserves to be in that space more than you. And it's like, you may have to give yourself a little pep talk before going in, but that's okay. And also notice, like, I think Nicole said this one time, like everyone's looking at their self. Like they're not really worried about what you're doing. And some other things that I would recommend to people is that a lot of times when people take on personal training, they think it has to be for this like long locked in extended period of time. And like any coach on here is going to tell you, like, I don't want you to work with me forever. If you're working with me forever, like, and you're not learning new things and becoming confident, like, I'm not doing my job properly. Now, there could be some individuals that just straight out like that guidance, don't want to think, want to turn it off, tell me what to do. I want you there with me. That's cool too. But also, if you're just looking to like get started, there's nothing wrong with like committing to 2 months of training, right? No program, none of ours at least is locked in. Like it's, you purchase a subscription, you can cancel at any time. So if like money's a factor, think about doing like 2 months and have that coach and tell them up front, like, hey, I'm just trying to get comfortable in the gym. I really want to work with you 2 months to get comfortable and to learn the movements. And then I want to be set free. I'm like, awesome. Because then like, I know straight up, like I need to explain to this person every single thing that we're doing. I need to call the movement what it is, so they learn what movements they're doing. I need to cue them in every aspect so that they know, like, they start to learn. And that helps your coach know, like, hey, this person's looking to learn and they want your feedback, and your feedback's not annoying. So that would be some of the things that I would recommend is like, if you're looking for a coach, don't think it has to be like a year. We can get you going in 2 months and then set you on your own. But at that point, you're going to feel pretty good about how to move and the movements that you're doing, where you're going to start to feel more confident. Another thing that you mentioned is, start light in your weight. But what I do see is individuals start light in their weight, but they start way too light. And I got to call my females out again. I see y'all doing chest press and you're just throwing these things through the roof. Honey, you can lift a lot more weight if those things are flying out of your hand, right? So like, but a lot of people don't know, like that's our job to really tell them how to gauge if a weight is too light or too heavy. So can you elaborate for our audience, like how do I gauge if something's too light or too heavy?
For sure. Yeah. That is a conversation I have with a lot of folks that I'm working with, especially like in my group settings. I feel like that's where it comes up the most. That one-on-one, I'm usually like, put this weight on and we can kind of move forward. But in the groups, they have a little bit more opportunity to decide for themselves. There's 2 aspects of that I really like, that I think are simple, that everybody could grasp. The first one is whatever your sets and reps are that you want to do. So like if you're wanting to do 3 sets of 10 and you're trying to choose your weight, if you can do 15 to 20 reps with that weight, it's too light. If you don't know if you can do it, give it a shot. And if you make it to 15, then you can tell yourself next time, okay, I'm gonna give myself a little bit longer rest here, and I'm gonna try and go up a little bit in my weight and see how I fare with that. There's going to be an occasion where you might overshoot it a little bit, and then you just kind of cut that set short, and then you can make that adjustment and go right back down. You always can change your weight. And I think that's important for people to understand. I think a lot of folks think that once they get in here and they pick up their set of dumbbells, they're kind of stuck with those until their workout's over. Like, you can get up and put those back for sure. The other side of it is realizing like the intent of it, right? Are you trying to train for endurance or strength and things of that nature? If you're wanting to train for strength, especially on that side of the spectrum, meaning heavier weights, it's all relative. Understanding, and this is a learning experience, but understanding what it feels like to be fatigued versus trying hard, I think is important, right? That fatigue feeling is, you know, I'm squatting, my legs are shaking, everything's burning, I'm about to collapse, I need to put this weight up right now, versus I might let out a little grunt and breathe really hard, but I'm able to progressively go through the range of motion. I'm not stopping, or the way I describe it to my clients is, as long as the weight's going the right direction, you're doing well and you can keep going. If you find yourself pausing, get stuck, anything of that nature, you know, potentially that you overshot it, and that's okay too. You can always recover and go from there. So
some like 80,000 things hit me at once, like experiences that I've had. But one that always happens, and it's even people that I personal train with, is like, we're on set 1, right? And we're going for 4 sets of 10. That's what we're working with. And the first set, say we did 15 pounds for a dumbbell chest press. We have 15 in each hand. It's the first set. And I'm like, how did that feel? They hit 10, right? And I see it with my eyes, like, that was so easy for them. And they're like, oh, it felt good this time, but by set 4, it might not. But what if it does? Like, here's the thing, like, I would flip that on its head and get it heavy in the beginning and then go down, right? And it's like, the beautiful thing about strength training is you are actually trying to fail. When someone told me that, like when I was really young, I was like, what? Everyone hates to fail, right? But the beautiful thing about strength training is, like, legitimately, you are trying to fail. So like another thing that you can do is, so say you're doing that same 4 sets of 10, right? And you're using 15s on each. You've done your first set, good. Second set, little harder. Third set, a little bit harder, but still really doable to you. On the 4th set, why don't you try to complete those movements until you fail? Like, just rep it out until you cannot rep a single more rep. I bet you hit like 25 of those. At that point, you're going to be like, oh, that's too light for me. Like, so I think the misconception is like, oh, I'm doing the work, that's good enough. But what you're not realizing is, like, your body has to have a stimulus to it, right? So when we're training, when we're working out, our goal is for our body to have to adapt to the stimulus that we're putting on it. So in layman's terms, we're stressing the body so much that when we sleep, our muscles, we're basically tearing the fibers in our muscles. So then when we rest at night, they need to recover to grow back stronger, right? And then we can eventually lift more weight. So we have to create that type of stress for our body to see any type of change. So if we're still lifting those 10-pound weights with every single movement we do, no matter if it's a curl, if it's a press, if it's whatever, and we're not creating the stress that we need, you're not going to see any changes, even if you are lifting every day. And that's what I think our audience needs to understand the most, is that sometimes you'll do the work and you're not seeing results. Well, we need to evaluate something that you're doing to see what is causing that kind of staleness in you achieving the results that you want. Another way is, you know, if you're setting yourself up to do sets of 10 and you hit 8s, maybe it's a little heavy, but like, maybe you want to push a little heavier. So why don't you make that rest of that set 3 sets of 8 and go heavy? There's no like brilliant, beautiful thing about like 3 sets of 10, right? Like, let's do 5 sets of 6. Like, so explain to me that. That's what I want our audience to know. Like, when you're in the rep range of like 5 to 8, 8 to 12, 12 on, can you talk about those rep ranges and what they're actually doing in the body? Like what type of training that is?
Yeah. So it's typically, it might be easier to start, from the template perspective. It's usually thought of as like a spectrum or a scale rather. If you're doing more reps, especially when we start talking about like double digits, you're thinking of what we call muscular endurance, stamina, things of that nature. Versus if your goal was to, and we kind of understand what endurance and stamina means, like longevity, being able to continue our efforts, versus if your goal is pure strength. I want to lift the most weight possible in this specific exercise. Typically, you're going to be on the lower end of that range. All right. So we're talking 1 to 6 is usually kind of, it's blurred lines, but that's typically kind of where that strength rep range tends to begin. That middle ground, 6 to 12, right? Again, blurred lines, it kind of overlaps a little bit. Those are still what we consider to be relatively higher volumes, and it can be like more like muscle size. So if you that's typically thought of as what we call hypertrophy, not to use too big a fancy words, but think if you said your goal is to lean out or to put on some muscle mass of any kind or to bulk up, like you're going to spend a lot of time, not all of it, but a lot of time in that middle rep range, trying to produce as much stress as possible, with sprinkling in some of the super high rep ranges, 12, 15 plus, and then sprinkling in some of the lower ranges as well.
And to go along with that, I think the same question applies for like rest. Like, how long do I need to rest between sets? Like, I think I swear it varies on gender. Like men rest way longer than women. Women just want to boom, 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 boom. Men will typically, and it's scientific, like actually men need more rest in strength training than women. But can you talk about like a typical, and I would say most of our users on here are looking to just gain some muscle tone. So for us, that means muscle mass. They're looking to gain muscle mass. Can you talk about just the average kind of rep range that they should stick between? Or
Yeah,
sorry, not rep
I
range,
think
but rest.
on the notion of, I was going to bring it back around. For sure, with the rest, for most people, I think 30 to 90 seconds, depending on the exercise, depending on the exercise and depending on how you're able, you as an individual, not you, Dana, but you as an individual person listening, can deal with fatigue and being tired. To shorten up your rest could be a way to like increase that stimulus or that stress that you mentioned earlier. But at the same time, there's also an argument for maximizing your rest and doing the best you can on the next set. So it goes both ways. But I think 30 to 90 is a good sweet spot for most people. If you're lifting heavier, typically you take more rest time. I know on my quote unquote heavy days, my rest sets or my rest time is 3 to 5 minutes. And I love every minute of it. Usually listening to music or something. Versus like if I'm intentionally going into, more endurance rep ranges, thinking 12, 15 plus, which I do actually do every once in a while. Those rest sets tend to be a little bit shorter, ranging in that more 30 to 60.
Yeah, I think that's a great recommendation. It's a good middle line to start. And then based on everything is like how you feel, right? How do you feel? How do you recover? One thing I would like to elaborate on is like some of this will not be comfortable. And I think we don't explain that as coaches enough, is like, let's go back to chest press. If I'm chest pressing 45s, I got 45s in each hand. That is heavy for me. Okay. I'm shooting for 8 reps. When I'm at my like 6th or 5th or 6th reps, it starts to be real uncomfortable. Like I'm not comfortable. It doesn't feel light. It feels heavy as can be. I got to let out some grunts. I got to press through my feet, but like it's doable. And that's creating like the adaptation, that's creating the stimulus that I need for my body to adapt. So like, I think it's also important to understand like You're not always going to be comfortable in that, but that's the beauty of growth, right? Usually growth never happens when you're comfortable. So it's like the saying, you better get comfortable being uncomfortable. That's totally strength training. It doesn't mean it needs to be dreadful and god awful every time you do it, right? But like it has to be somewhat difficult to achieve that adaptation. So I want to go back to like our beginners or even like our intermediate trainers. Can you lay out like a type of program you would use to start? Like, how do I know what or when to train? I know that's hard to do just from like a speaking standpoint, but give me your best shot here.
For sure. Definitely a challenging question. I would say I'm gonna shape this more so as to what to aim for during the week and less like the specific exercises. So when I'm working with folks and they're in that realm of like, I either haven't exercised in years or I don't exercise or I never have exercised. And I would also take the second to point out that there's not that big of a difference between those two people. If you've been taking time off and you're wanting to get back into it, you need to start at the beginning and pace up. You might be able to pace through that quicker than someone who's never done it, for sure. But I do think it's important to acknowledge that you should start lighter and move up. But anyways, what I usually have folks do is 2 to 3 days a week, and I try to get most people towards that 3-day a week line. Focus on your movements, right? So people think about like, oh, I'm going to work my biceps today, my triceps today. Definitely put a little bit greater emphasis on the movement itself, and what that might be is, and bear with me on this terminology, think upper body push exercises, bench press, push up, overhead press, etc. Upper body pull exercises, so that's think like pull ups, lower body pushes and pulls, and then think about your core, right? Rotations, flexion, extension. So that's like, think about flexion being like sit-ups, right? And rotation, think about Russian twists. Just to give a couple examples. You want to sprinkle those in throughout the week. What I'll usually do is I'll pair 2 choices together, upper body push, lower body pull one day, get at least 1 day's rest. And that rest day is usually like walking or something active of that nature. I try to have folks be as active as possible on rest days. That actually does improve recovery. The next day will be your upper body pull, lower body push. I had to make sure I didn't repeat those. And then the third day might actually be relatively lighter full body exercises, trying to come back and touch on everything. And then what I didn't mention there is like, I might put rotation on one day and then the other core exercises on another day. Just spread it out. That's your main goal, is to spread that out. I'd point out, that we do offer that personalized exercise plan, and that's something that us coaches could help out with really quickly and explain really efficiently with the exercises actually in front of folks, if that's something they're interested in. But ultimately, focus on your movement patterns, spread them out evenly throughout the week, and make sure you have at least 1 day of rest between. I'll put that in quotations again, because I recommend folks be as active as possible. If you like walking, go walking. If you like hiking, go hiking, swimming, etc.
Yeah, and I mean, another way you can do that, like if you're like, these people are talking and I'm just not going to do anything that they say, like it's just too much. Like a good place would be like, join our virtual studio, watch some of our videos, and then like start doing them at home. You're in the comfort of your own home. Nobody's looking at you. You're there. You don't got any makeup on, nothing, like just do you. And then you'll start hearing like the same type of movements that the coaches are doing. You're like, oh, that's a squat, that's a hinge. Like you'll start to pick up on those, and then confidence will build over time. And I think you just have to get exposed to things. No one is comfortable with something until they've done it few, like more and more and more. That's how we get comfortable. But if we just straight up say, I'm not going to do that because I'm not comfortable, well, how are you going to get comfortable if you don't ever try it? And that's kind of a safe space to start if you don't want to be in front of people or you're hesitant to do that. We have a question in the chat, and I'm actually going to turn it over to Beth for this, because Beth does a beautiful blend of this in her training. I do as well, but I really want her to speak on this a little bit more. the question is, if I'm doing strength training, should that be the only thing I do for the day, or can I mix cardio in as well? So can you answer that question? And then talk about how you have really built a beautiful blend of both still being a cardiovascular exerciser that also strength trains. So let's hear what you got.
Yeah, you put me on the hot seat.
And go.
It kind of depends on the season I'm in. If I'm training for a race or like what my specific goals for that time period are. If I'm training for a race, then I usually have days in particular that I'm running, and sometimes I'll run after I train. But if I'm not necessarily training for a specific race, then a lot of the times I do cardio after my workout sessions. So right now I've been doing more like spin exercises, so spin workouts with Peloton or with other workouts after I lift, just to make sure I get in a little bit of cardio, get my heart rate up if it didn't get up enough during the strength training session. Sometimes I do strength training sessions that are a little bit more geared on endurance and kind of cardio based, and so it kind of gets that heart rate up, gets kind of both done together, the strength and the cardio. So sometimes like a metabolic workout, if I'm not training a lot for a race, then it's a little easier on my body. But it's really hard to do like really high metabolic intense strength training workouts and be running and training for a race. That's just a little bit too much for the body. So it kind of depends where you're at, but usually if I'm training for a race and running more, then I'll lift about 2 times a week, maybe 3, but usually 2. So it's kind of what X was saying with the upper body push, lower body pull. And then the second day will be the opposite of that for strength training for me, with core sprinkled in. And then the other days will be running. So maybe 4 days of running. Maybe a day might be after the strength training, but most of them will probably be their own day. So.
And it's like Beth mentioned multiple times, like it's what your goal is, right? If your goal is to run a race, like your primary focus would be running, right? But if your goal is to lose weight, gain some muscle, things like that, predominantly you should lift before you run, because you want to exert your energy towards what your main goal is, right? So at that point, I would look to strength train for like 30 minutes and then hit an interval session on the elliptical or the stair stepper or the treadmill, where you may be, let's say you're doing an elliptical. You may be going at a harder pace where you're busting ass for 30 seconds and then going at a little slower pace for the next 30 seconds, and do that for like 15, 20 minutes. Boom, you got a killer workout in 50 minutes. And like also, a lot of people think every workout has to be like an hour. I promise you can get some work in 30 minutes if you're willing to like bust it while you're there. So like keep that in mind too. And while we're on the cardio thing, I want to ask this question. I know we're going close on time, but the big question is, does strength training burn as many calories as cardio, and how? So I'm going to call on Xavier, but I also want Matt Hands to hop in here as well. Xavier, what do you got for us? What's the answer here?
For sure. I think in most instances, the time you spend weight training might not burn as many calories in the moment as a cardio workout will, but what it will do over time is you're going to improve that muscle mass and that lean body mass, and you're going to burn more calories at every other moment of the day than, let's say, a person of the same gender and the same height would, that doesn't have that resistance training background that you've created. So therefore, like if you do resistance training and cardio, like your cardio workouts all of a sudden will be burning more calories in that moment. Again, not to get too scientific, what that is increasing your resting metabolic rate. And so, like, for example, someone like I'm about 6'2", someone who's my height who might not have quite as much muscle mass won't burn as many calories as I do in any given activity at the same intensity.
And I think it's like a lot of people just, if they don't sweat a ton during their workout, they don't feel like they got a good workout, and that's just not the case. Like when you are strength training, like you're burning calories after the fact, you're building more muscle, which then when you have more muscle, you burn more at rest. So Matt Hands, I'm going to turn it over to you. What do you think here? Or what do you know, rather, based on science?
As far as the, you cut out there for a bit when I had to reconnect, so I may be
Yeah.
a little out of the loop. The
Does
strength
strength
training and cardio section?
Yeah, does strength training burn as many calories as cardio, and how?
Depends on what you're doing in that strength training session, I guess. I hate to say that it depends, but you know, a lot of it is going to be heart rate dominant or dependent. So you can make your, you know, your strength training go, you'll get that heart rate up a little bit. What if you're supersetting everything? You know, what if you're trisetting everything? What if your rest periods are really short? So you're keeping that heart rate higher throughout the session. That's going to really dictate, I guess, the total calorie amount. Some of that is how much weight you're using, what type of exercise are you doing? Are you doing single joint versus multiple joints? Or are you doing more power based? So a lot of dependent stuff on there, but you can most definitely utilize strength based movements in a cardio session for sure.
100%. We're running really close on time, but I want to ask this question. When can I expect to notice any changes? Because that's what we all want to know. Like, we're putting in the work. When can we expect to see these changes occur? Xavier, that's on you.
I was like, okay. Yeah, typically 4 to 6 weeks is what I tell most people to expect to see something, right? So if we talk about visual changes in the mirror, which I do think count for something, that's generally the way most of us measure ourselves on a daily basis. Like, you'll be able to start to see some sort of change within that 4 to 6 week period. If it's strength itself, 4, 6, 8, 12, it can depend on your program. It can depend on what lifts you're doing. If you're like wanting to measure like your actual improvement in strength, ultimately it does depend on a couple of different factors, but I think as little as 4 to 6. One thing I would point out though is that the longer you've been resistance training, it should be expected that those big noticeable changes do start to happen a little bit fewer in between. They don't necessarily have to stop. You know, it depends on how you're measuring things, ebbs and flows of life. But just understand that you're going to make a lot of progress in the beginning, and you will continue to make progress, but it's going to slow down a little bit the longer you've been training.
For sure. Like, if you're a beginner, you're going to see results. If you're putting in the work and your diet is pretty good, you're going to see results in the first 4 to 6 weeks, and a lot of results. If you're a person that once worked out and 2 years have gone by and you hop back into it, you're going to see those type of results. But if you're someone that's been training for like, even like 4 years, 4 to 5 years, like you're not going to see those big changes. And remember, like, you're going to see the changes at 4 to 6 weeks. Your family is going to see the changes in you in about 8 weeks. The world will see changes in you in about 12 weeks. So do not get, down if you're not seeing those changes. One question in the chat box real quick is, should I expect to be sore after strength training and then use that as a guide to whether my workout was hard enough? Just because we don't have time, I'm going to answer this. Not all the time. No, you should not use that as a guide to if it was hard enough. That's just a blanket no. Because the more you do it and the more your body becomes accustomed to your movements, like the less sore that you're going to be. But should I expect to be sore? Probably. Like, I still get sore in certain areas, and I've been training for about 14 years. So my hamstrings get really sore. I could demolish my shoulders and they're not going to be sore. So it just, again, it depends, but I would not use that as a guide to whether your workout was quote unquote hard enough, right? If you put in the work and you worked hard, right? So I think that's something that a lot of people become accustomed to is their training. If they're not sore, they didn't think they did anything. That's when they have to be honest with themselves and say, did I put forth the effort? And if that's yes, then hey, that's a win, right? I think we are up on time. Xavier, fantastic conversations. Strength training can be talked about in 85 different ways. So really nice job. Guys, that's all we have today because we're up on time. But next episode is Tuesday, March 8th. This one's going to be a good one. It's all about hustle culture. Is it even necessary? So the hustle, the bustle, the no days off, that type of culture. We're going to be discussing that to see, do you even need it? So join us March 8th. You can catch this recording on Zoom in the next few days. And thanks guys for joining. See you next time.
Thanks, everyone.